coming to you from the world headquarters of Press Pass TV.
With an update.
We've got a very special guest and treat for everyone.
Hey, welcome to Press Pass TV. Thanks for joining us. I'm Michael Lartzis. We've got a very special treat for you today. Before we get to that, we've got to pay the bills, so to speak. I want to thank Blue Microphone for providing my microphone equipment for today. It's really a great company. They've got a lot of great mics, including the Snowflake, which is what we're broadcasting with. It's this little mic that you can fold up into a laptop, or put on your laptop, fold up and put in your bag, and it's very versatile. It goes in USB, but they have a lot of other great mics, including the Snowball and some analog mics that are great. This is a digital mic that works USB and is wonderful for all sorts of broadcasting, podcasting, and video chat and conferencing applications. So check them out, bluemic.com. Also want to thank Uvu, who's providing us with a wonderful platform to broadcast on and allowing us to do many different things. And at this point, I want to welcome our guest, Sean Chercover from Toronto and Chicago, and we'll get to that in a little while. He wrote this book, Trigger City. It's his second book, and it's an amazing book. It came out and hit bookstands in October of 2008 this year. So we'll be talking about the book and also getting to know Sean a little bit. So, Sean, thanks for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Where are you today? Is it Toronto?
Toronto today. It's the commute is killing me. I'm back and forth between Toronto and Chicago all the time, but I'm in Toronto through the new year.
Ah, very nice, man. Tell me a little bit about this book and how you came up with the concept for this book. I'll tell you real quick about the book, basically, and I don't want to give too much away. I always, with mysteries and thrillers, I'm always careful not to give too much away. But basically, it's about a PI, a private investigator, who is hired by a former, I think he's a Marine, but a former high commanding official in the armed services to investigate the death of his daughter, which on the surface seems like a very straightforward murder-suicide. But as you get into the book, it seems like there might be more to it. How did you come up with this?
Well, it's interesting. You know, my first book, Big City, Bad Blood, as a launching pad for the plot, I used a thing called the fake landlord scam, which is a Chicago invention. It's spread across North America now. But I had some contact with the fake landlord scam when I worked as a PI in Chicago years ago. But with this book, none of it came from that, from my life. I was actually watching television. I was watching C-SPAN and watching congressional hearings into the billing practices of various military contracting firms. And it sparked my interest, and I started doing a little more research. I watched some documentaries and read some books about the reality of outsourcing the military. And I was fortunate to one of the really cool things about this job is the research. You know, you get to go on ride-alongs with the police, and I got to tell you, the cops are a lot more friendly to me as a writer than they ever were to me as a private investigator. And I got to the FBI figures large in Trigger City, and I got to do a behind-the-scenes tour of the new FBI Chicago headquarters, which was really cool. Anyway, one of my law enforcement contacts put me in touch with some guys who had just come back from Iraq, and these guys are what you used to call mercenaries, but these days you would call them security contractors. So we went out to a bar on the north side of Chicago that caters to military people called Jarheads, and after a night of tequila shots with these guys, they decided I was okay, and they opened up and told me some stuff. Now, I'm sure what they didn't tell me is a lot more than what they did, but even what they did tell me was enough to make my head spin. And I was just amazed at what goes on in military contracting. And so it's a fascinating secret world that most of us would never get any kind of a glimpse into. And I like exploring those sorts of things in fiction. So as you said, the book starts as a kind of murder-suicide, by deranged coworker. But as Ray looks into the death of this woman, he realizes that a year previously she had been head of payroll at a military contracting firm. And the man who killed her might not have been crazy after all. He had worked for her there before, and that's just too big a coincidence to swallow. And it's the kind of the job that you would totally just walk away from. You would not want to be involved in a case like this. But by that time, Ray has met the widow of the murderer, and she's not very cooperative, and she's not telling him everything. And clearly, she's afraid for her life and afraid for the life of her 10-year-old daughter. And Ray, being the kind of guy that he is, even though his better judgment tells him to walk away, he can't walk away from that. So he gets into a whole bunch of trouble.
I actually found it interesting that, I would have walked away about 100 times during Ray's experience. He couldn't. And I found it interesting how I think that I mean, it would have been hard the way you presented it. It would have been hard, but I think that you got him into it deep enough that it's very believable that he couldn't walk away, because that makes it very hard. But I think that most people would have walked away. How did you come up with the different ways of doing these things, keeping him? I mean, how did specifically, excuse me, I have to learn how to talk today. Specifically, in keeping him on the case when most people would have walked away, how did you come up with that?
Well, I had to tie it. I had to make it very personal for him, because you're right. Anybody who isn't, suicidal would walk away from this thing. I know I would. But Ray, I had to make it very personal for him. I tied it into some of his personal, his own demons that he carries with him, and his own issues that he's trying to work out. And so he had a personal motivation, trying to prove what kind of person he wants to be. And I also, the police have basically walked away from it. The case has been solved and cleared and closed. And there has been pressure brought to bear by powerful people and to leave it closed. And so the police are not going to help this young woman, this young widow. And basically I've cut her loose. So Ray is her only shot. And if he walks away from it, he knows he'll be walking away from this woman and her daughter, who are clearly in jeopardy. And they're in jeopardy because of him. They were relatively clear of any danger before he started investigating. And by putting the moral burden on him, it was his investigation that caused them to be in danger again. I tied it up with his own demons, and that way he couldn't walk away from it. Otherwise, if it had just been a case that had nothing to do with him, and if his investigation hadn't triggered the danger, then it would be hard to create a believable scenario where he wouldn't just walk away. Any of us would.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and you definitely made it believable. You put him morally on the line, and I think most men still might have walked away, but he stayed there. And I think, like you said, tying him in his demons made it work. It also is very believable with all the scenarios that you have. It's very vivid. I think I certainly imagined in my head as I was reading it every scene and every place that we went in the book. Tell us about the research that you did. It must have been so cool, and doing it must have been really a lot of fun as well.
Well, yeah, Ray drinks in bars a lot, and so that provides me with an opportunity to do a lot of research, which consists of drinking in bars a lot, all over Chicago. But I love doing the research. The research is a great part of the job, and I like to set scenes in bars and in neighborhoods that reflect the mood of the scene and that particular part of the story. Ray's a former newspaper reporter, and so he drinks in places like the Billy Goat Tavern and Rossi's and Ricardo's, places where newspaper reporters in Chicago tend to congregate, the Old Town Ale House, places like that. And I live part-time in Chicago and part-time in Toronto. My wife and I go back and forth all the time. And I just love to drive all over Chicago and just wander the neighborhoods and soak in the feeling because Chicago really is, they call it a city of neighborhoods, and it really is. Every neighborhood has its own distinct feeling. And it's also fun just to kind of give a shout out to places I like, restaurants, bars, places that I personally like. He drinks at one point in the book at Jake's Pub, which is basically my local. It's where I drink. So I like to do little shout outs like that to places that I love.
Well, that's pretty cool. The one thing I found unsettling with the book, and it has nothing to do with you, it's the fact that these security companies, so to speak, the guns for hire, it really makes you take a look at what these guys are doing in Iraq. or think about what they're doing in Iraq, and that scares me. That, you always kind of fear that they're doing whatever they want out there, and while they're maybe achieving their mission, they also could be in it for themselves, making a lot of money, doing all sorts of things, and you don't really know. It doesn't seem like the government really watches over them once they hire them, and I think that's the
well. That's right. I mean, one of the pernicious effects of outsourcing military is that you subvert the oversight of Congress. There's congressional oversight over the military, over the Department of Defense, but there isn't congressional oversight over private firms that are working on contract. And they look into their billing and so on, but they really don't have the level of openness and transparency that we really should have. But the bigger problem is it drains resources from our military. It takes away from the support that our men and women in uniform should be getting. And to me, that's unconscionable. I don't think we've treated our military personnel very well when they come home, and I think they deserve a lot better from us as a country. And draining resources away from the military is, to me, never a good idea.
Well, I think you've nailed all the aspects of this book, and I think that you're correct in saying that, and it certainly makes you think about it a little bit more, and hopefully makes other people think about the situation a little bit more. But you've certainly nailed all the scenarios and scenes and everything. I felt like the reporter aspect was very real. I felt like the PI was very real, and I think that's part of you. I think that there's at least your experiences are in the book. But the ones that you've lived, and I wanted to talk about that a little. What's the road been like getting to become an author? Because I know it didn't go straight from college to writing books. Or
Certainly
any other
not.
normal path.
No, I really didn't. I really didn't go about it in a normal way at all. I knew I wanted to write from the time I was a child, maybe the 5th grade. I knew I wanted to write, and certainly by high school, I knew I wanted to write crime fiction. But I did not take a direct route. I traveled around for a while, ended up at Columbia College in Chicago, and studied a little bit of everything. Basically, I like to say I majored in indecision. I just took courses until I had enough credits, and they said, okay, get out of here, and I had a liberal arts degree. But during my last semester, I knew I was going to need a job soon, and I had interviewed a couple of Chicago private eyes as research, just to learn how they do their jobs, because I thought I might want to write a PI novel. And so I called them up and I said, if they had both talked about how they farm out work to younger people, overflow work and that sort of thing. So I said, if I got the training, would there be work for me? And they both, to my surprise, said yes. So I went, and concurrently with my last semester of college, I took the state-mandated training, and I earned my Illinois Blue Card, which allows you to work as a security consultant, bodyguard, or private investigator. And I went to work as a private detective. And really the idea was just to do it for a very, very short time, just to learn how the job is, maybe a couple of months, and then start writing. But, life gets away on you, and you're busy making a living. And I eventually moved to New Orleans and did it there for a little while, and finally realized that, it's time to get on with being a writer. And I made my way back to Toronto, but I didn't write the book right away. I started writing television documentaries, children's shows. I worked craft service, feeding people on sets. I sold encyclopedias for a while. I did all sorts of jobs, drove trucks, and every once in a while I would start a manuscript, and I'd give up after 80 pages or 120 pages. It wasn't going well, and I was basically teaching myself how to write these things, and I would give up on it and go back, and eventually I was making a pretty good living writing television documentaries, children's shows, doing some video editing. And I woke up one day and I was 35, and I said, man, stop telling yourself you're going to write one of these books, or write one or the other, but don't keep going this way. So I turned down some clients and took some time off, and finally finished a manuscript. And that first finished manuscript was Big City Bad Blood. It was the first book that I got published. So it took a few years to get there, and it was a long and winding road. But I will say, it all turns out to be grist for the mill. All of these life experiences, I think, you were talking about realism, and having done so many different jobs and lived in a bunch of different places, I do think that all I'd like to say it was part of a big plan. It wasn't. But in retrospect, I do think that all those different life experiences are grist from the mill and did help me bring realism to the work.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. I mean, I think that it really gives you more perspectives to write from and more perspectives to experience. And, you know, even when you're driving a truck or you're doing something else, you meet people and you get to hear their perspective on life. And it helps you that much further in what you're writing or what you're doing in life to see other people's perspectives, including
absolutely
anything. So it really gives you a great way to write stuff and a great outlet to really just be knowledgeable about a lot of different things. And that's the one thing I always say is that I think it's good to know a little bit about a lot of things in addition to what you are an expert in. So Big City Bad Blood, I'm looking forward to reading that, by the way. I know that it's been out a while. It's now out on hardcover. And after reading Trigger City, I've got to check that out. I wanted to ask you about Chicago. I've been to Chicago a couple times, and one of the coolest things that I did in Chicago was I took a midnight tour with a cab driver gave me a midnight tour of the city. Took me into the underground part of the city, which is a very scary part of Chicago. Basically, for those of you who don't know what Chicago is like at night, or downtown. Chicago has a rule that no trucks are allowed into the city during the daylight hours, except for UPS or FedEx or whatever. But all the store deliveries have to happen at night. So there are all these loading docks underground under the city, and in addition to that, they have all their garbage. It goes straight down underneath the city as well. Basically, they built the city on stilts. Basically, there's 2 levels or 3 levels to the city. I always imagined, especially going down there at night, that it was so quiet that there was a lot of probably mob activity down there.
There's a lot of stuff that goes on down there, and in fact, in the first book, which eventually I hope you'll read, the Big City Bad Blood, in that book, Ray Dudgeon has a secret meeting with an FBI agent on Lower Wacker Drive, which is part of that underground tunnel system, and I love it. It's very moody, and I love that part of the city. I love going for walks down there. You get a lot of story ideas just wandering around down there at night.
And so many people don't even know about it. It's really amazing because everybody I bring it up to who's not from Chicago is like, what are you talking about? And I've even talked to some people from Chicago who don't even know about it. So I find it really interesting, and I find it also interesting the more people don't centralize movies or books down there. In the future, could we see a book from you that actually centralizes down there?
Oh, that would be cool. That's a great idea. Thank you. I'm not going to give you credit for that, but I will steal that idea.
Don't give me credit. Just send me a free book. I'll write it.
Absolutely. You're on. There were 2 movies that have car chases in that system on Lower Wacker Drive, The Blues Brothers, and The Dark Knight, the new Batman movie, which was largely shot in Chicago. Oh, well, you should. It's awesome. There's a great car chase, and part of it takes place on Lower Wacker Drive, so you get to see a nice car chase in that underground system.
Yeah, it's certainly a scary area, and that's pretty cool. I'm going to check that out. I haven't checked out The Dark Knight yet, but I've wanted to. What about places to go in Chicago? You got favorite places to go, restaurants or things to do? I know I've been to that huge Ferris wheel that's out on the pier, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I like that you can, if you're in a high-rise building, you can see Lake Michigan, which is pretty cool. And my favorite place, restaurant-wise, which I think is amazing and has some history to it, maybe even some mob ties, is Gene and Giorgetti's Steakhouse, which I think is just a fun place to go, and the portions are so big.
Incredible steaks, great atmosphere, and it's real old school Chicago. I mean, that is the real Chicago that hasn't changed all these years. Yeah, Gene and Giorgetti's is a great place to go for a steak. I live in the Lakeview area, which is south of Wrigley Field, and that Lakeview has incredible restaurants all over the place, including some of the best burgers in town. Chicago takes their burgers very seriously. Duke of Perth, which is on Clark Street, has incredible burgers and a huge selection of single malts. I love going all over the town. The new Checkerboard Lounge on the south side is not a bad place for blues, although it's not quite the old Checkerboard Lounge. Buddy Guy's Legends is a great place to go for blues, and Rosa's on the west side. I go to a lot of blues clubs. Kingston Mines and Blues are also well worth visiting. Joe Siegel's Jazz Showcase is an incredible jazz club. If you like jazz, I would recommend that, and the Green Mill on the north side. Joe Siegel's Jazz Showcase is in Dearborn Station, which is the south side, the South Loop. It's right around the corner from Buddy Guy's. So there are a lot of places. I'm all over that town all the time. It's my favorite city in the world, and you never run out of places to go.
Now let's give Toronto a little bit of love. Is there going to be a book set in Toronto at all, ever, maybe?
I don't know. Toronto is where I'm from. It's home, and it's hard for me to see it through a writer's eyes, because I lived my whole childhood here, and I don't know why that is, but for whatever reason, when I moved to Chicago, I see it. I think perhaps the fact that I'm not from Chicago may have actually helped me to see it through fresh eyes. Possibly someday I'll write something in Toronto. Maybe Ray Dudgeon will take a case that brings him to Toronto. I don't know.
Maybe he'll take a case that brings him to Toronto. And my favorite place in Toronto is the Hockey Hall of Fame. So maybe he'll get to do both of those.
Hockey Hall of Fame is a great time.
Yeah, but not going to happen, right? What would he do with the Hockey Hall?
No, it's not going to happen. Ray's not a hockey fan. I like hockey. I grew up as a Leafs fan, but Ray's not a hockey fan. He's baseball all the way.
What was being a PI like? How crazy is that you were a PI? Like, what was that like?
It was ultimately kind of depressing after a while. I enjoyed it. I learned a hell of a lot. But, everybody you come into contact with pretty much is at a pretty low ebb in their lives, or you wouldn't be there, You don't make a lot of friends. But it was fascinating. It was an interesting time in my life. I learned a lot.
You get to take a lot of you get to take a lot of pictures of girls making out with guys, right? A lot of husbands hiring you to catch their wives cheating.
I did do some domestic work, yeah. Once people go behind closed doors, they're off limits. Yeah, okay. I'll do that right away. And you do a lot of insurance fraud, too. It wasn't all domestics, although a depressing percentage of the cases are domestics.
I like insurance fraud. I like that you catch people in the act of committing insurance fraud, because that always bothers me. It always makes our insurance rates go up.
You feel, actually, that's one area where you feel really good about it, because if you catch them, they don't get their, that's right, all of our insurance rates go up because of the people who are committing fraud. And if they really are injured, if they're not faking it, then they get their money. So you feel good either way with that sort of a case.
Exactly. Well, I got to tell you, I love this book, Trigger City. You got to check it out. It's on books now. Amazon.com or Borders or wherever you go to buy your books. Check it out. Trigger City, a lot of fun. Definitely a page turner. I couldn't put this thing down. In fact, I stayed up till 4 a.m. one night when I had the last about 70, 80 pages. I couldn't put it down. I did not skip a single page. Sometimes I'll skip 20, 30 pages that are getting a little boring to me. Not at all here. What's next for Ray Dudgeon?
Well, I'm working on two things right now. The next Ray Dudgeon book, which is, in fact, an insurance fraud case, but a very grisly insurance fraud case. And I'm also working on a standalone thriller.
Okay, awesome. We get a little insight on the standalone?
I will tell you that it is set primarily in Savannah, Georgia, and it deals with a crooked preacher.
Excellent. Very interesting. I like that because I think that happens a lot in real life, and I think it could be interesting. Very cool. Well, Sean,
thanks.
Is there a website people can check out to find more about you or find out where you're going to be?
Absolutely. It is my name, Chercover, Chercover, spelled like share cover, Chercover.com or SeanChercover.com. Either one will take you there. And there's always new stuff on the site, including contests. I give away prizes and that sort of thing. So please drop by and say hello.
Excellent, man. That sounds very cool. I'm glad that we did this. I want to thank you very much for your time. You were awesome. And I really like this book. I got to recommend this. Anybody who's looking for a good thriller or is not looking for a good thriller, just a good book. Check it out. Trigger City on book stands. And don't forget Big City, Bad Blood. That's on softcover. You got to go get that one, too.
Thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate your having me. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely, man. Next time we'll talk a little bit more about the next book, and we'll talk some gadgets and some other stuff. It was great getting to know you.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Cool.
And next time you come to Chicago or Toronto, give me a buzz, and we'll go out.
Absolutely. For everyone at Press Pass TV, I'm Michael Artsis. Check out Trigger City and BlueMic.com. Hooked us up with the microphone equipment on my end, which I think sounds really good. That's the Blue Snowflake. BlueMic.com. Check them out. I'm Michael Artsis. Be terrific.